My name is Eitan Dartsi, and on October 3, 2019, my life changed forever. Before I tell you what happened that day, what I saw, what I experienced, you need to understand the kind of person I was before it all unfolded. I was born and raised in Haifa, Israel, the son of a proud IDF officer named Colonel Yaron Dartsi and my mother, Miriam, who worked as a high school teacher. My father was a man of unwavering discipline, a career soldier who believed deeply in service to his country. Every Shabbat dinner, he would remind us that serving in the IDF wasn't just a duty. It was a responsibility to protect our people, our families, and our very right to exist. His words stayed with me throughout my life. For me, believing in that mission was as natural as breathing. Even as a teenager, I felt drawn to the idea of service. While other kids spent their free time playing sports or going to the beach, I would sit in my room for hours, buried in books about military history. I obsessed over stories of soldiers who had shown bravery in battle, men who had made sacrifices for something greater than themselves. My father encouraged this passion, and by the time I was 16, he had personally taught me how to field strip an assault rifle blindfolded. I can still remember how proud he looked the first time I did it without a mistake. My mother, on the other hand, seemed uneasy. She never argued with my father's teachings, but I often caught her watching me with a quiet concern in her eyes. "Eitan," she would say softly, "never forget that soldiers on the other side have mothers too." At the time, I didn't understand the depth of her words, but years later, I would. When I turned 18, I enlisted in the IDF and quickly rose through the ranks. I pushed myself harder than anyone else, determined to make my father proud. By the time I was 23, I was leading my own counterterrorism unit, specializing in urban warfare and high-risk raid. We were sharp, fast, and highly effective, and we believed deeply that what we were doing was right. Each mission was carefully planned, and we followed our orders to the letter. Civilian casualties, while tragic, were explained away as part of the cost of war, something we called collateral damage to make it easier to live with. I believed we were fighting for something noble, something necessary. At least, that's what I told myself. But one mission left a mark on me that I couldn't erase. We had received intelligence about a militant hideout in a residential area, a building believed to be harboring dangerous targets. At dawn, we moved in swiftly, breaching the door and clearing room after room with precision. We found the targets we were after, but we also found families. I'll never forget the moment I stepped into one of those rooms. There was a young girl, no older than 6, sitting silently on her bed. Her wide, terrified eyes locked on mine, and for a brief second I felt my chest tighten. Something about her expression, that pure, frozen fear, unsettled me. But I buried the feeling, just like I'd been trained to do. We finished the mission, neutralized the threats, and returned to base. I was commended for my leadership, yet that night, I couldn't shake the image of that little girl's face. Her frightened eyes followed me into my dreams, and in the days that followed, I found myself thinking about her constantly. Something about that moment lingered inside me, a feeling that wouldn't go away. As much as I tried to forget that little girl's face, it stayed with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, those wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. At first, I told myself it was normal. Soldiers carried memories like this all the time, flashes of moments that we had to push aside to keep moving forward. But this was different. No matter how hard I tried to focus on my work or distract myself with my routine, that image wouldn't leave me. It was as if something inside me was warning me, trying to tell me that what I had seen that day was more important than I was willing to admit. Then came October 3, 2019. The day that changed everything. It started like any other morning. My unit had been tasked with patrolling a tense neighborhood on the outskirts of Jerusalem, an area known for its volatility. Intelligence suggested that militants had been moving weapons through that district, so our orders were to monitor the area closely and investigate anything suspicious. I remember how bright the sun was that morning, how the air felt dry and heavy. I kept my mind sharp, watching every alley, every doorway, every shadow. After years of training, awareness had become second nature. About halfway through the patrol, we received a report about unusual movement near an abandoned vehicle just a few streets away. It wasn't much, just a vague tip from one of our informants, but something about it felt off. I adjusted our route, leading my unit down a narrow side street where the vehicle was parked. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that makes your instincts kick in. As we moved closer, I spotted a small package tucked against the wheel of the vehicle. It was partially hidden beneath some debris, but I knew right away something wasn't right. I raised my fist, the signal for my team to halt. My pulse quickened, and I felt that familiar rush of adrenaline start to build. Carefully, I began assessing the object, noting its shape, size, and placement. Years of experience told me that this was more than just trash left on the side of the road. I started the standard threat assessment procedure, but I never finished it. In an instant, the world exploded around me. A deafening blast filled my ears, and all I remember was the blinding white light swallowing everything. Then, nothing. For a while, I felt like I was floating in darkness, not unconsciousness, but something different. There was no sound, no pain, no weight, just an endless, empty void. I remember thinking, so this is how it ends. But then something shifted. The darkness began to peel away, and I became aware of something, voices. At first, they were faint whispers, distant and unclear. But they grew louder, stronger, overlapping words and cries, as if hundreds of people were speaking at once. The strange thing was that I could understand them, every word, every plea, every sorrowful voice. Some spoke of regret, others of anger or confusion. And then I realized, they were the voices of the dead. The voices surrounded me, filling every part of my mind. Some were faint, barely above a whisper, while others cried out with such force that it felt like their words were being etched into my soul. They weren't just sounds, I could feel their emotions. Waves of regret, pain, and heartbreak seemed to wash over me. Some voices spoke in languages I didn't recognize, yet somehow I understood them all. Others spoke in Hebrew, familiar voices that felt closer, more personal. And then I heard something that chilled me to my core, the voice of a child. It was faint at first, but I recognized it instantly. It was her, the little girl from the raid. Her voice trembled with fear, but beneath it was something even stronger, confusion. I felt everything she had felt in that moment when I burst into her room, weapon raised. Her terror wasn't just about me, it was about the chaos, the shouting, the way her world had shattered in an instant. I felt her panic, her helplessness, her desperate need to understand why strangers had stormed into her home. Worst of all, I felt her heartbreak, that innocent pain of a child realizing that nothing would ever feel safe again. Suddenly, I was moving, not walking, not floating, but being pulled forward through a tunnel-like space. This tunnel wasn't made of walls or stone, it was made of memories, my memories. Scenes from my life flickered around me like moments projected on a screen. But this time, I didn't just see them, I felt them. Every mission I had led, every target I had neutralized, every order I had followed, I experienced them all again, but not from my own perspective. I felt what it was like to be on the other side. I became the father whose home we had raided in the middle of the night. The father who stood helplessly while soldiers stormed through his home, unsure if his family would survive. I felt the agony of a mother mourning her son, a young man we had mistaken for an enemy during one of our operations. I felt the pain of soldiers on the opposing side, men who had believed they were fighting to protect their families, just as I had. Every moment I had justified as necessary or collateral damage unfolded before me, no longer wrapped in the comfort of excuses. There was no hiding from the truth now. I had caused far more pain than I had ever realized. The weight of it was overwhelming. I wanted to look away, to escape this endless wave of sorrow, but I couldn't. I had to face it. And then, just when I thought I couldn't endure any more, the tunnel opened, and I found myself in a place I can only describe as a city of regret. The place I found myself in wasn't what I expected. There were no flames or demons. Instead, I stood in a vast, shadowy city made of black glass. Towering structures stretched high above me, their jagged edges swallowing what little light there was. The streets beneath my feet glowed faintly with a dull, red hue, like burning embers trapped beneath layers of stone. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and with every breath I felt the weight of something far greater than fear. It was regret. All around me were souls, countless faces lost in their own private torment. They weren't screaming or being tortured, but each person seemed frozen in a moment of terrible realization, locked in memories they couldn't escape. I saw soldiers like me, men who had once believed they were doing the right thing, now forced to relive the pain they had caused. They weren't evil people. They were men and women who had convinced themselves that their actions were justified. But now they faced the undeniable truth. Their choices had left scars far deeper than they had ever imagined. Then I saw something that shook me to my core, a group of children standing silently near the edge of the street. They didn't seem trapped like the others, yet their presence was far more powerful. Their faces weren't angry or vengeful. Instead, they watched with eyes full of sadness and disappointment. Among them was the little girl from the raid, her wide, frightened eyes still etched into my memory. She didn't speak, but somehow I knew exactly what she was thinking. Why did this have to happen? Why didn't you stop it? I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and in that moment, it felt like everything inside me broke. All the excuses I had clung to, the belief that I was just following orders, that these losses were unavoidable, they all crumbled. For the first time, I truly understood the cost of what I had done. Every life I had ended, every family I had torn apart, every innocent caught in the chaos, they weren't just numbers on a report. They were people, people with families, dreams, and futures that I had helped destroy. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the weight of my regret was crushing me. I wanted to run, to disappear into the shadows of that city, and escape the truth I was being forced to face. But then, something changed. The air shifted, and a powerful presence filled the space. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, overwhelming yet peaceful, terrifying yet comforting. Without warning, a brilliant light appeared, piercing through the darkness like the first rays of morning after a long, endless night. Out of that light stepped Jesus Christ, and the moment I saw him, I knew exactly who he was. There was no question, no doubt, it was him. He didn't speak at first, but when he looked at me, I felt everything I had ever done, every choice, every mistake, every life I had impacted, laid bare before him. I wanted to fall to my knees, to beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't move. I felt exposed, yet somehow, I also felt loved. Jesus stepped closer, and when he spoke, his voice wasn't harsh or angry. It was calm, yet filled with unimaginable power. He said my name, Eitan, and when he did, it felt like every moment of my life was wrapped inside that one word. I could feel his heartbreak, his sadness, not just for what I had done, but for the pain I had caused myself by losing sight of what truly mattered. "You have seen the truth of your actions," he said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "Now see them through my eyes." Suddenly, memories began to flood back, but this time, I wasn't just watching them. I was feeling them. I felt the pain of the families who had lost their loved ones. I felt the fear of that young girl in her bedroom, frozen in terror as I swept through her home with my rifle raised. I felt the anguish of the mother who had cradled her son's body after a mission gone wrong, a young man I had mistaken for a threat. With each memory, I felt Jesus' grief, not just for the innocent lives that had been taken, but for the soldiers like me who had believed they were doing what was right. I realized that he mourned for all of us, for the victims and for those who had lost themselves in violence. I gave you life to bring life, he said, not to take it away. His words felt like a fire inside me, burning away the lies I had told myself for so long. I broke down. All the strength I had carried as a soldier, all the pride I once felt, it all shattered in that moment. I couldn't hold back the tears. I felt so small, so unworthy, and all I could say was, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I kept repeating it over and over, but no words felt strong enough to undo what I had done. I expected Jesus to turn away from me, to leave me in that place of regret, but instead, he knelt down and placed his hand on my shoulder. The moment he touched me, I felt something I can't fully describe. It was as if waves of love and mercy were pouring into me, washing away the shame I had carried for so long. The pain didn't disappear. I still remembered everything, but for the first time, I felt hope. I knew I didn't deserve his forgiveness, yet he was giving it to me anyway. "Your hands have dealt in death," he said softly, "but I am offering you the chance to become a bearer of life." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but then he showed me something else, a vision of what my life could be. I saw myself working with soldiers like me, men and women trapped in their own guilt and regret, helping them find peace. I saw myself sitting with families who had lost loved ones, offering comfort and understanding. I saw myself standing between enemies, not as a soldier, but as a peacemaker, someone who no longer brought fear, but hope. "The path I am showing you will not be easy," Jesus warned. "You will be mocked. Some will call you a traitor. Others will say you've abandoned your duty. Are you willing to pay that price for truth?" I knew the choice I had to make, but part of me was afraid. I had spent my whole life believing that strength meant following orders, pushing emotions aside, and doing whatever it took to complete the mission. But now I realized that true strength wasn't about force. It was about courage, and the hardest kind of courage was choosing to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. Through my tears, I managed to whisper, "Yes, Lord, I'll do it." The moment I spoke those words, I felt something break inside me, not in a painful way, but like a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. Jesus smiled then, and it wasn't just kindness, it was like warmth itself radiated from him. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember what you've seen. Every soul is precious to me, friend, enemy, all of them." Then he reached out and touched my forehead. Instantly, everything began to fade, the blackened city, the faces of the lost souls, even the presence of Jesus himself. I felt myself being pulled back, away from that place, until suddenly I gasped for air, back in my broken, pain-ridden body. Medics were surrounding me, shouting orders, trying to keep me stable. I later learned that my heart had stopped for 12 minutes, 12 minutes that felt like an eternity. But somehow, I knew I had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right. The physical recovery was brutal, but nothing compared to the battle going on inside me. My body healed faster than my mind did. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, the voices, the faces, the unbearable weight of the truth Jesus had shown me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the little girl's face, and I remembered what Jesus had said, "Every soul is precious." I knew I couldn't go back to being the man I was before. Something had to change. Within weeks of being discharged from the hospital, I made the hardest decision of my life. I resigned from the IDF. My father was furious. He said I was abandoning my duty, betraying everything we believed in. My former comrades, men I had trusted with my life, looked at me with disappointment, some even with disgust. I tried to explain that I wasn't turning my back on my country. I just couldn't continue living the way I had before. But most of them didn't understand, and honestly, I don't blame them. How could I possibly put what I had experienced into words? Despite the rejection I faced, I knew I had to follow the path Jesus had shown me. I used my military pension to start a non-profit organization dedicated to helping soldiers deal with trauma, guilt, and regret. I started reaching out to people who had been caught in the violence, families who had lost loved ones, both Israeli and Palestinian. It wasn't easy. Some refused to speak to me, and others saw me as a traitor. But slowly, things began to change. I watched former soldiers, men who had been hardened by years of violence, find peace for the first time in their lives. I saw grieving parents find comfort, knowing their pain wasn't forgotten. For the first time, I felt like I was finally doing something that mattered, something that brought life instead of death. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, the road wasn't easy. There were days I felt overwhelmed with doubt, times when I wondered if I was really making a difference or if I was just trying to run from my past. I lost friends, faced insults, and even received threats from people who believed I had betrayed my country. But whenever I felt like giving up, I remembered what Jesus had shown me, that no act of love is ever wasted, and that every soul is precious. One moment in particular will stay with me forever. During a workshop I hosted for former soldiers, a man approached me afterward, someone I immediately recognized. He had been one of the men in my unit, someone who had once called me a coward after I resigned. With tears in his eyes, he told me he had been battling guilt for years, haunted by the faces of innocent people caught in the crossfire. He said my decision to walk away, the very thing he once mocked, had given him the courage to face his own regrets. We cried together that day, two soldiers who had once been blind to the damage they had caused, now united by a shared desire to bring healing instead of destruction. Looking back now, I see that my near-death experience wasn't just a warning, it was a gift. Jesus didn't just show me the consequences of my actions. He showed me a new path, one rooted in compassion, forgiveness, and peace. My life isn't perfect, and there are still moments when the memories weigh heavily on me. But I now understand that redemption isn't just about being forgiven. It's about choosing to live differently because of that forgiveness. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to know something. No matter what mistakes you've made, no matter how far you've fallen, there is hope. Jesus offers all of us a second chance, a chance to turn away from darkness and become bearers of light. If you're feeling lost, I encourage you to seek Him, to ask for His guidance, His forgiveness, and His love. He changed my life, and I know He can change yours too. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please consider sharing this video so that others can hear this message of hope. And if you've ever struggled with guilt, regret, or the weight of your past, know this: it's never too late to find peace.